Hey there, folks. Today we're talking with Dr. Andrew Sellars about respiratory muscle training, specifically about why the respiratory muscles are often overlooked as a trainable system. When you think about improving athletic performance or health, why do you believe respiratory muscles are often overlooked?
Hmm. I think historically there was a fair bit of debate in the literature about what the limitations to performance were. Uh, and the focus was always on cardiovascular and muscle strength and muscle endurance. And I think it's easy to overlook respiratory because it's something that everybody does naturally every moment of their lives from the first breath they take to the last breath they take. And quite often people don't feel it as a limitation. So unless they have a diagnosis of exercise induced asthma or COPD or other chronic illnesses, they may not ever notice the feeling of having limitations of the respiratory system. So it's a hidden limitation in a lot of ways. And I think um, it's also it's also challenging to study. Um, we have tons of data that people actually haven't looked at. So all the VO2 testing that's been done over the decades has not looked historically at how people breathed through those tests to achieve the results they got. And it's only
Mhm.
now with the advent of more portable units and more VO2 testing availability, because it's less expensive and it's less challenging to get access to that data, that we're actually starting to see how people are actually breathing during a variety of sports outside of the lab.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Andrew. That so many people send us their VO2 data as we're consulting them on respiratory muscle training, and that's one of the ways that I like to objectively lead people down the road of respiratory muscle training. But I can't tell you how many reports I see in a week from people from around the world where the professional reporting given to them has no information about all the respiratory mechanics that have been collected to give them the VO2 data. They're really just presented with a one pager with some math giving them their zones maybe, and a VO2 max number and maybe some, fat to carb ratios, that sort of thing. But really it's like, yeah, it's really missing a massive piece of the understanding of how we can get better. It's not just the output of VO2 that we're interested in. It's how we got there, and whether that's a mechanical problem or that's a chemical problem or a metabolic problem. It helps us to understand how to prescribe training, and that information is available to the physiologist that you're consulting. It just needs to be mined a little bit and presented in a way that's usable.
Yeah, and that's an important point for those people who either haven't been through VO2 testing or don't know that much about VO2 testing. But we're talking about the consumption of oxygen by the body. In order to measure that, you actually have to measure ventilation. You have to measure how someone's breathing, how much they're breathing in a given minute, to calculate the amount of oxygen they breathed in and subtract the amount of oxygen they breathe out, and that's the difference, and that's the amount that's been consumed. And so every VO2 test that's ever been done also has ventilation or breathing data associated with it, because you can't measure oxygen consumption without measuring the volume of breath that they've taken. So, but yeah, you look through the literature and look at how many tests, how many studies look at VO2 testing results, but don't ever mention ventilation and don't ever
Hmm.
mention how the person breathed and the differences between individuals within the studies. So it's a fascinating gap in the literature that is um, it's going to be easier and easier to pull data from thousands of people, because we now
Hmm.
have thousands of people doing VO2 testing, and we have data systems that are much easier to work through to be able to pull that data. And I think that's going to be a big wave for the future, is understanding different people's respiratory challenges in the future.
Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments or topics you'd like us to cover, leave it in the comments below and we'll get to it on a future video.